All right. So, this is my review for Satanis, the documentary about the Church of Satan. So, Satanis is a documentary that came out in 1970. It was about the Church of Satan, though it was recorded in 1969. The film was very obviously recorded before the Tate LaBianca murders, so there wasn't any sort of disclaimer about the crime and the group when it was recorded. I only bring this up because, from a historical context, after the Tate LaBianca murders, some people were looking at the Church of Satan as being potentially responsible for the crime, as, of course, certain members of the Manson family had some ties with the group. That said, Satanis is a mildly interesting film that takes a look into what was still the very new satanic religion. You see shots of people being interviewed around San Francisco and what was the common person's opinion about Anton LaVey. Watching the film, it was clear to me from the start that many people have had their doubts and criticisms about the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey from the start. From the start, you know. What's interesting to me is that the way that this movie appears, it's clear that this confusion on whether Anton LaVey was a devil worshiper or not was likely intended from the beginning of the church's birth, foundation. I feel like there's always been this confusion, especially among the evangelicals, that, oh, Anton really believed in the devil, he really worshiped the devil, and that was always discredited. But in a strange way, it was kind of like, especially when he was alive, sort of perpetuated that it might be possible. There are various people that have been asked their opinions on the Church of Satan that are interviewed in the film, and a lot of people are of a negative mindset about it. Part of it comes from the obviously traditional Christian mindset about Satan and the devil, that Satan is bad, a tempter, and a liar. Some of the people interviewed seem to believe that the Church of Satan was about literal Satan and demons. I remember that there was one person, a woman who was interviewed, and she stated that she thought that what LaVey was doing was wrong, that she was leading those people to ruin, basically. Considering that it was 1969 when this was recorded, and the Satanic Bible had only barely came out that year, it can't be expected that people would have read it and have known that that was not what Anton's group was about. In some ways, I think that Satanis was actually trying to dispel some of these myths from the early Church of Satan years. There's footage of 2 rituals that are performed at the Black House, and while it is interesting in some ways, especially from a historical context, because Anton eventually stopped doing this, I think that these rituals run for way too long in the film. I don't think that it was necessary for them to show what was probably majority of the ritual itself. Do we need to see the entire thing? I don't think we did. But I think that this was left in the film to pad out time, because it's not a very long documentary. I mean, it's about the standard size of what you would find in other videos, a little bit over an hour. But if you were to take these rituals out, the documentary would be less than an hour, definitely. I guess that for people that at the time, especially who had maybe never heard of the Church of Satan or weren't very familiar of it, they maybe only heard of it by name but didn't obviously read anything about it, these ritual scenes were likely to show what the inside life of it was really like. In some ways, I could see this as showing that they're not really scary. Granted, for 1970, some of the things in the film still likely scared people because of the whole Satan title itself. In 2026, many of the parts within the ritual scenes appear campy and hokey, honestly. While Anton wasn't necessarily trying to appear like he was in a living horror movie, it's always been clear to me that certain parts of his rituals were for show. Watching this movie 5 decades after its release, there are things that just seem rather normal to me than, freaky. The opening scene with the ritual was honestly really cheesy. One thing I couldn't get over, I thought it was funny how monotone and bored everyone sounded when they were reading from the books in front of them, Anton included. And I know that's just how some people are, that's their reading voice, but it kind of made me wonder if the rituals performed on film were just that, performances. You see scenes that show Anton's wife at the time, Diane. Not that it really matters this much to me to point this out, but Anton and Diane were never legally married. Granted, it was kind of funny to me that there were people interviewed in the movie, the documentary, that believed that they were. I'm not, like I said, this doesn't matter to me, but it was just interesting how people thought they were legally married. It was interesting, though, too, to see footage of Diane as, of course, later on she would leave him in the 80s, in the next decade. To me, this is just the way it appeared, and I'm not saying this is how it was, but the way it appeared in the documentary, it seemed like Diane didn't seem that into the magic part of the church as much as she was the social aspect of it. There are parts of the film that did actually shock me, not in a, oh my God, kind of way, just like, really? Really? Kind of way. For example, like when there was a man that was on the altar at the ritual chamber and his ass was exposed. For whatever reason, Diane kissed the man's ass cheeks. And I was like, that's interesting, because was this something she always had to do? Did Diane always have to literally kiss people's asses? This is a legitimate question of mine. And on top of that, did she find that demeaning? Even if it was just for the video, did she find it demeaning to kiss that man's ass? And on top of that, why didn't Anton kiss that man's ass? Why didn't Anton kiss any man's ass? Or did he kiss anyone's ass? Anyway, interesting though. Very interesting. Even though I already knew this, after everything I've read about the Church of Satan, what was interesting was how this documentary showed very open attitudes the church had towards homosexuality. And I say this because this was filmed in 1969. So even at this point, so early in the church's foundation and life, it shows that, this very open mentality. In the decades since Anton's death, people have claimed that the Church of Satan sold out and became woke, basically. Ironically, Anton shows in Satanis, which was 28 years before his death, that he didn't have anything against homosexuals at all. At least that's how it appeared on film. The Church of Satan accepted this from the start, which I think is important to note because, like I said, people act like with some of the people that have been in charge with the church since Anton's death that they changed it and it's woke and Anton would be spinning in his grave. Well, Anton said himself in Satanis that they don't tolerate homosexuals. They accept them for who they are. You know what I mean? And that's the thing I always have found actually interesting about Anton LaVey is that, yes, he was edgy and kind of, I mean, he would say things to obviously get under people's skin, but at the end of the day, he actually had some really good points. They weren't tolerating, the existence of homosexuals. You know what I mean? I don't just tolerate him. I'm not just like, okay, I'll be around him. No, it's like, okay, you're gay. Anyway, that's the way it appears, literally in this film. And this film came out in 1970. And this was also seen, the open mindedness, actually, in one of the later ritual scenes in the film. So later on, there is a man who, his, I guess you'll say, wish, his desire that Anton asks of him, this man claims, he lets it out in the ritual that he desires for this new banker who moved in his neighborhood to hopefully be attracted to him. It's not explicitly said, like, I'm gay and I'm looking for a gay lover. But, if you know what he's talking about, you realize this is a gay man. And he's wishing for, this man to hopefully have a relationship with him. I did laugh, though, because during the same ritual scene, after him, there was this really nerdy looking guy, and he asked for his penis to be moist like Leviathan. I was like, ew, that's gross. That's nasty. And it made me shake my head because I was like, y'all are so fucking dorky. Like, that's the thing that really gets me about the Church of Satan, is that so many people have been against it from the start because obviously the name, and they don't realize how it has almost always been a group of nerds. And I'm not even trying to be an asshole. Like, it's just a very nerdy group of people that read a lot, really, you know? But there were things in the film I didn't like. For example, there were certain things that kind of just made me shake my head, like not in the good way, I didn't care, for example, how overt people were in the film with sex. And I don't think that is actually so much from the Church of Satan as much as the time period and the location. This was, of course, at right before the hippie movement largely ended in San Francisco. San Francisco, which has always been considered, an open-minded sexual place, to put it that way. I think part of that is just from the location itself, not so much the Church of Satan. But there were some things that I still found to be kind of gross. For example, how one of the women, the 53-year-old woman who claimed, I don't want to repeat what she said, but what she said about her son, I found very gross. Why would you admit that? I understand that the Church of Satan and the Satanic Bible and all that talks about, your carnal desires and basically not denying things that are just literally human. I'll put it like that. It's natural to have sexual desires because that's what we are as humans. I agree with that. But I think that there are people, and I really believe that later on after this film, there was a lot of things I really believe that Anton realized, it's really not great that we have people who act like this. Because people like that woman, who they would take it too far. That's pretty much my point. I think some of these people really were like, yeah, Satanism, and I'm just going to be a freak. And it's like, somehow being a sexual freak also meant basically breaking these satanic tenets. But I'm getting a little too into the weeds. I just want to leave this as a review for the film itself. So, do I think that this is the type of documentary that a regular person would watch or understand? No. Especially in 2026, I really don't believe that people would watch Satanis and think that it answered their questions about Satanism or the Church of Satan. And that's not necessarily derogatory. I just think that when Satanis first came out, there were, I think, just questions, the general question of, what even is this? And that's, Satanis is a very surface level film. surface level documentary. It doesn't delve actually into what the Church of Satan is about, not very far into its philosophy, just a few tidbits here and there. So in 2026, a lot of the questions people would have, such as the honestly spiritual, magical, a lot of the magic is not really discussed. And that is, I think, a derogatory or a negative contention. I'll put it that way. Satanis has since become more of a piece of history for the Church of Satan, something I think to be watched by those that are very familiar with LaVey and his teachings, or his writings, I'll put it that way. You don't necessarily have to be a member of the Church of Satan, because I'm not. But if you're just interested, I would say just from a historical perspective of what Anton LaVey was talking about, I think this is an interesting film from that perspective. The way the church developed after this film became rather outdated, actually, by the end of the decade, by the end of the 70s. I believe it was 1975, if not 76, that Anton stopped performing rituals altogether. I believe that the idea of the Church of Satan as a social group was frowned upon. So by about 1975 or 76, rituals were pretty much stopped altogether. Anton stopped doing it. And by ritual, obviously they mean this group setting of people getting together and being, somebody naked on the altar and having the sword and this and that. So by 75, that stopped. And the idea of the Church of Satan as being a social group was frowned upon. And this is interesting because if you watch Satanis, the Church of Satan does appear like it was a group of friends that got together. So I also can see why, first of all, people would think, oh, it's just like a cool hangout group, when that wasn't Anton's intention, at least as time moved on. But I can also see why Anton might have, I think that watching this film when it first came out or in the 70s, I can understand why people would think that this was more of a social group as opposed to being, something about essentially philosophy. There were scenes where some of the members are in the room with Anton and they are discussing random things. It was interesting to see how there wasn't this dynamic in the film of bow down to Anton, our Lord, dear leader. As in the years since, people seem to have thought that's how it was. Instead, when you watch Satanis, it appeared more like a Saturday night of cards with friends. Once again, reiterating why I could see why people would think this was more of a hangout group. And it does appear that the Church of Satan was more of a theosophical or philosophy club, which in many ways they are, even to this day. And I know, especially in Professor Barton's book, We Are Satanists, she reiterates, she's very staunch about it being a religion, which, hey, whatever. I'm not the authority on religion, so if they want to call it a religion, let them. But it's in the sense of being an enlightenment religion or something that talks about philosophy. There is a lot of philosophy that goes into the Church of Satan, and I don't think we can deny that. Interestingly, in news articles from when Satanis came out that I was able to find, it actually appears that not when Satanis came out, but around the years surrounding it, so the late 60s, that's what I meant. There are some articles that say Anton LaVey was a part of the Theosophical Society. And I wonder if this group is what inspired him to eventually create his own group, the Church of Satan. One thing that really surprised me, of course, when watching this, was how Diane and Anton readily admitted to performing curses on people. And it's not me like, oh my God, they're doing magic. Ah! It's more of a, okay, so I can accept that y'all do magic. But you're okay with admitting that you put curses on people. Because to me, I'll just put it like this. If you admit that, then aren't you welcoming that back at yourself? I mean, that's as far as I'll go with that point. But like I said, I was surprised that they would admit that on film, honestly. I'm surprised within various pieces of Church of Satan literature, even after this film, that certain people have admitted that they do actual black magic and that they put curses and hexes on people. I don't want to go into it. I'm just going to say that that's very surprising that someone would admit that. Another interesting point that I had about Satanis is that you see on the chest of the 53-year-old woman on the altar, 666 is painted on there. Uh, and in the years after Satanis, Anton would write that 666 wasn't a satanic number, but 999 was, because the number 9 is, a working and all that stuff. Yet here, in what was recorded in 1969, you clearly see that this is different. You don't see 999, you see 666. I've come across this actually in articles about Anton from the 60s, with one article that showed a picture of Anton's car, and the license plate had 666 on on the plate, So I wonder, and this isn't even me being like, they're a bunch of liars, see, it's fake, bleh. For me, I'm like, you know what? If you changed it, fine. What I found very interesting about this is that, was this change from 666 to 999 because of the satanic panic? And if so, I would be curious if they would admit that. And I would understand why, honestly, because the satanic panic did get very, very bad, and they were getting blamed. Satanism was being blamed for things that had nothing to do with religion. I honestly believe that many of the things from the original Church of Satan years, and by that I mean the 60s and mid 70s, I think a lot of that early Church of Satan stuff was changed after the satanic panic for legal reasons. And I don't think they would ever admit that. Honestly. Granted, to me, I wouldn't blame them. I would not blame them at all. If they're like, yeah, we used to say this, that, and the third, but because of the satanic panic and a lot of potential legal issues, we go by this now. And for that, I would completely agree. You know what I mean? But anyway, so in some of the interviews with the townspeople, you see them talk about whether or not they actually believe if Anton worships the devil. And before I forgot to write this down. One of the neighbors, this old man who I actually found hilarious because this dude obviously hated Anton. And this old man despised Anton, which in many ways I can see his perspective why. He was like, their lawns never made up and this, that, and the third. But what was very interesting was that I guess this guy was asked, what did he think Anton really does? And he was like, he didn't really know, but he did know that in the past, people would pay Anton for spells, and, and curses and stuff. And this was 1969. And this old man said that people would pay Anton $200 or $300 for these spells. And I was like, well, hold up. How much was that? So adjusting it for inflation using like 2025 money, Anton would be paid the equivalent of like $2,000 just for spell work. And so I was like, there's certain things here that you wouldn't catch on the first glimpse. Unless, like me, you've already read like 1,000+ pages worth, on the Church of Satan, and then you watch Satanis, or of course you watch Satanis and do homework on the Church of Satan, you go back and you watch some of these things and you're like, they didn't really flat out say this, but now, pieces to the puzzle are kind of solving a mystery. Because one of the questions people have had is that, well, if Anton didn't work or Anton wasn't part of the circus, what did he do? And that's a question I've always had. Okay, so let's say this, that, and the third is fake. legitimately, what did Anton do? There's articles that say he was part of the Theosophical Society. Did he make money with them? And if he made money doing spell work, how much was he making on that alone? $200, $300 in the 60s was a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of money now, but that was a lot of money back then. So anyway, the people that were asked if they thought Anton really believed or worshipped in the devil, some people believed that yes, they thought that he did. And I think some of this was the misunderstanding because it's called the Church of Satan. And then, of course, others didn't believe it. I found it very interesting because there was like Christians and Mormons interviewed. Some of the Christians in the movie stated that they believed it was just like self-aggrandizement for Anton, a way to promote himself, which honestly, I agree. I don't think it's bad to say, in many ways, Anton was trying to promote himself because articles that I've clipped, before this have showed that Anton was hoping to be like a performer in some ways. Anton obviously liked music and hopefully wanted to do something with it, but it didn't seem like that panned out because the Church of Satan pretty much took off for him. One older man even stated, though, that he didn't think the Church of Satan had anything to do with transcending, that you would see, the topic of transcendence as seen in other religions, which, I think is fair. I think that is fair to say and not blasphemous at all, because the Church of Satan themselves say that they're atheists. So, I mean, how can an atheist expect to transcend? That's, I think, a very fair thing to say. There are more tidbits in Satanis that I didn't ever see mentioned anywhere else in any book. There was more info about Tagar, Anton's line that he used to own, and some of it was disturbing, and I'd rather not repeat it because I don't want to repeat something that might have just even been a rumor. There were some things about Tagar's behavior that I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But one that was pretty shitty was that apparently he actually scratched Diane in the past. And what was interesting was that the way this was brought up, one of the townspeople interviewed stated that she saw the scratch mark on Diane's shoulder in court. And I was thinking, why were they in court to begin with? Was it for when they eventually had to give him up, because Anton got in trouble with Tagar, freaking out because this is something else I've clipped before. One of the reasons why they had to donate Tagar to the zoo is because Anton was babysitting for another friend's exotic large cat, a jaguar, and because of territorialness between these animals, the house was torn up, basically. So I'm not sure if that was the reason why they're in court, but like I said, one of the townspeople saw scratch marks that Diane had from apparently Tagar. That's something I've never seen in any of the books about the Church of Satan. Once again, I've never understood the interest Anton or anybody, not just Anton, but I mean, this is Tiger King shit. If we remember that, Tiger King? I've never understood the interest in owning exotic animals in a small suburban setting. The most I can understand, of course, is things like snakes, but there's no reason for somebody to have a tiger or, a jaguar and things like that. By the time Satanis was recorded, Tagar had already been donated to the zoo. And the way they say Tagar in this is different from the way I guess you're supposed to pronounce it in the books. And I'm like, how the fuck do you pronounce this damn lion's name? My God. Anyway, so there were various members of the church interviewed for the film, but for whatever reason, their names were never formally divulged. Granted, that might have also been on purpose because some people might have still wanted to be a secret. This was back, at a time period where things were very, very manual. And so you could see somebody's face, but if you don't know the name, you can't really prove it's them, right? For a documentary, though, it would have been nice to see name cards or something. You know what I mean? Like, oh, here's so and so talking, or here's blah, blah, blah. The most you could gather whether a person was a Satanist within the church or not was if they were wearing a sigil of Baphomet, the common necklace, I guess you'll say, identifier. Excuse me. But even still, you would have to already have known about that to have known that that was a Church of Satan thing. If you don't know about the sigil of Baphomet and you watched it, you would just be wondering why the hell are they wearing that, you know? I looked up Satanis in the newspaper archives, and there was really only stuff on it from the year alone of 1970 when it came out. Mostly, of course, ads about the movie. Some reviews lightly touched on the matter. Interestingly, some ads stated that the Church of Satan was a cult. Another article joked that they were afraid of Anton after he, because he admits in the movie to performing, of course, black magic, but, curses. So it was pretty funny. This one review was like, Anton, I'm your friend, good old buddy, pal, man. It's like he wouldn't have, I don't think, just done it to a bad review. I don't think. But anyway, from articles though, here we could, well, not hear it, but like, from the articles I was able to find, Satanis was released on March 4th, 1970. That's what I'm saying. That's what, like, the opening night, the earliest day I could find in the archives. On the opening night of the film, it was played as a benefit for the church, and anyone that attended would receive free copies of the Satanic Bible. Interestingly, one ad for Satanis had Night of the Living Dead advertised with it. I do believe that it is interesting how it was a benefit for the church, and I know a lot of people are very critical of the Church of Satan for understandable reasons. But I think that initially when the church came around, it was to me, it just appears very tongue-in-cheek. And Satanis reiterates that point I have. The Church of Satan was just very tongue-in-cheek, anti-Christian. But as time went on, it became a lot more philosophical. So Satanis is a picture of what it looked like at this point in time before it became the big philosophy club that it kind of turned into today. This movie doesn't seem to be mentioned after 1970. At least I couldn't find any reviews or any more ads on it after this in the newspaper archives. I didn't hate this, but I would rate it a 2 out of 5 stars. And it's not because it's about the Church of Satan, actually. I give it a 2 out of 5 because the filmmaking itself is not very good. I believe the director himself was very young. It was like, I think, his final project for his college. I believe that's what I had read. The director really should have done more to explain who the people interviewed were. There was this really interesting older woman. She never had any kids. She just had cats, and she was a Satanist within the church. Very interesting, very obviously a philosophical woman. And there are things like that I found interesting, that those would be the type of people it would attract. I wish it could have delved more into that. But in many ways, as other people, even in modern day, have talked about this movie, they'll say, it was just more of a promotional material for the Church of Satan. And I can agree. I agree with it. I think the director of the movie really should have put more emphasis on what the opinions are or were for the church itself. And, let Anton and the others explain what the church really stood for. Because at the end of the day, documentaries are meant to inform. And I don't believe that Satanis really accomplished that. And that's not necessarily because of Anton himself. You would think that the person creating the film would put more emphasis on informing the people because it's supposed to be a documentary. So that's all I really have to say about it. if you're just a general person, you probably wouldn't watch it. But if you've read a little bit or a thing or two about the Church of Satan and you want to see maybe like how Anton LaVey conducted himself when he was alive, you could check it out. I watched it once. I probably wouldn't watch it again, but interesting enough. And that's the review. Bye.